Guys, thank you for joining the SAP Super Summit. Today we've got myself, Andy Whitehead from Advanced Tech, and we have John Sanchez, the Director of Advanced Tech, and we have 10 of the world's leading speakers on SAP. Now, we put together this summit because we have many relationships, in fact thousands, whereby we found a gap in the market whereby a lot of SAP consultants are looking to find knowledge, be trained by the best in the industry, but can't travel. So we're based in the UK. We have relationships in Germany, in Switzerland, across Europe, and indeed in the United States. And we brought together the world's top experts for a 10-hour marathon webinar today. Now, our first speaker is Nis Boy. We'll be talking about the SAP user interface strategy, an overview and roadmap. So the presentation will take place for 1 hour. During this hour, Nis will be speaking for approximately 45-50 minutes, and then we'll be taking questions. So throughout the chat, please hold your questions until the last sort of 5 minutes, which will be about 45 minutes in. So that'd be approximately 9:45 GMT time. Any urgent questions, please use the chat facility, and our moderator will pick them up. Nis Boy joined SAP in 1995 and is now seen as one of the innovators and indeed one of the chief product owners on user interfaces on SAP. So with that said, we're going to pass over the controls to Nis. Enjoy the seminar. It will take 45 minutes, as I say. Please hold your questions, and then for the last 10 minutes, we'll be putting questions direct to Nis. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay, thank you, John, for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this first Super Summit event. I'm very happy to do that. As Dan introduced before, my name is Naeve. I'll do a short introduction of myself. I'm talking about our SAP user interface strategy. Today's world, user interfaces become a very hot topic, and that's why I think a lot of people are interested in that. I have a lot of customer meetings with that. We're also presenting at conferences and so on, and it's always a hot discussion about it. Some of you have probably seen in LinkedIn today, just like the first news again, user interface, very simple. The UK seem to have done a very good job on that, just proving how important that topic that is. Actually, I'm working for SAP, as John stated, so therefore I need to show you this disclaimer, but don't worry, I won't go into any details of that. Who am I? Who are you listening to? As I said, Nis Boy Naeve, that name probably is a global unique identifier. I was born and raised up in the Northern Europe hemisphere, close to Denmark in Germany. That's where that name is from. I joined SAP in '95. I actually started in the development of an HR component, took over responsibility for the personal development, and after that I did a 2-year project with a customer, which I really liked, because that was the first time where we were really kind of experiencing this kind of user needs, because the user from that customer was really put in the center. So really starting on with the requirement, it was all focused on user requirement. So this was probably where my journey into the other side, into the user experience side started. After that, I did some internal projects and programs. At that time, we were actually calling it more user productivity. And that also shows at that time, that was around 2003, 2004, where the value was seen of that area. Well, today we talk about user experience. So today, in today's world, it's not only about making users productive, but also about making users enjoy the software and making users want to work with that, which we will also see later in the presentation. So as part of that, as we were changing that, I founded a program office on the topic user experience. I founded the SAP internal UI governance. I founded also a UI guideline team. And 2.5 years ago, when SAP was taking over the principles of Lean, I was assigned to become the Chief Product Owner and Vice President of our user interface technologies of the key UI technologies. So I run the backlog and the strategy for those key UI technologies. So out of that, my background is development, management, project and program management, which I still consider one of the key assets of that one. user experience big picture, and I especially talk about a big picture because I'm not a designer. And I think that is very important if you're dealing with user interfaces. People really need to know and understand what they can do and what they cannot do. User experience, as I said, is a hot topic, and it's probably a hot topic because people like to be involved. It creates emotions. It gets people in there. So everyone thinks he's allowed to have an opinion and allowed to raise that opinion. While if you compare it to other technical topics like life cycle management or other, people are happy if people who really know their job are dealing with that. So internally, externally, we have a lot of discussions also on that. I don't like that. I don't like that color. It should look different. It should look on. So therefore, it's an extreme sensitive discipline to work in that area because you have so many people to deal with. And I guess if you are listening to this presentation, you're probably very well aware of that. Actually, my overall background is physics. I actually did a dissertation in chaos theory, so that probably is a good background also for all this. What do I want to show to you today? It's really give you an introduction of the topic. What is it about? It's about design thinking. There are some key principles which we should follow on that. And then the key thing is I want to give you a simple approach, a three-step approach on how you can improve the way users work with SAP. My key focus area, therefore, is what's currently out there with the business suite, because that is what is most widely used, and how you can create that situation. So I won't go off too far in the future, but I want to keep this somehow realistic and realizable for you, that you can really take some concrete actions and have some good ideas of what can be done there. So as part of that, we will talk about clients, what about content SAP is delivering, how can you adapt user interfaces to specific needs. HTML5 is also a very prominent word out of that. So what's really behind it? There's an SAP implementation of that. What can that do? What can that not do? Where is it helpful? And then in the end, we will also see we have to put a lot of things together. So how does it really work and fit smoothly together? That is one thing where we definitely need to look into. Before I said I won't go too much into the future, however, I will still give you an outlook of what might come next from SAP in that area, that you also have an idea of what our overall direction is, where we're going. And not to make it too dry, I will also show you some demos, so I'll try to show you as much live as possible. However, as the devil is always in the details, this morning I experienced already some issues with signing into these conferences, so Murphy's Law is alive, so bear with me that is working out fine here. Okay, so let's start. User experience. And there's a lot of to do before we even talk about technology. User experience, the key word is in it. It's about the user. So therefore, what we really need to do, we need to put the user in the center. We need to know the user, we need to get to him, and we need to understand him. So therefore, it's all about what we call this user-centered design, design thinking, and those are two methodologies which are very well used. User-centered design, definitely not an SAP invention. It's out there in the user experience community for quite a while. However, we at SAP had to adjust it to SAP specific needs because there are hardly any other companies out who do software development on such a large scale. So therefore, we also have to make it scalable. And design thinking is a very well iterative approach on how to approach and solve problems. So how do we do it? As I said, get to know the user, understand the user. So we start with what we call user research, and where the key is really to watch users at their workplace, in their working environment, to understand what they're doing, where their problems are, where they're successful, and where they can need additional help. Actually, one of the big tricks for us was for a while, we were getting out to customers very easily, but really watching the real end user is the difference, because if you just ask the manager, those people typically see different problems than the users themselves. So out of that user research, we take back and what we describe as a use case, which really describes the problem, the process, and the task which should be done. And we take that as a basis to do a first design iteration. I wrote UI first, so we really draw the user interface. We create so-called mock-ups, which really gives us a first design. These we then take to get back user feedback. You might know that next week we have Sapphire and TechEd in Madrid. So there again, we have a very popular spot out there where you can sign up and actually do user testing of latest application, of latest user interface design. And we take that feedback, reiterate the design before we then hand it into the implementation. That is where the real coding or configuration, as we learn later, will happen. So this is where the real application is just being assembled. So a lot of before we even get technical out of that. One key thing which I would like to mention, the process should not stop when SAP leaves the software, when SAP releases the software. Actually, I really advise all our customers, partners, and everyone dealing with SAP to think about the same thing. Once you receive something from SAP, there are still a lot of options to customize it, to configure it, to personalize, and so on. So therefore, it's again to really understand what are your specific users' needs, what are your users, what are your specific needs, figure out what is the right configuration, maybe do some iterations with users, figure out what's really valuable for them before you finally release it and roll it out to them. That certainly will drive up the satisfaction and the happiness of the user. So coming to the next topic, when we actually design things, how do we do that? We have some design principles in place. For sure, we also have design guidelines in place, which we will follow. And these design guidelines actually are based on three key principles. The first one you can see already on the screen. We call it lean delivery complexity on demand, which has nothing to do with the cloud or on-premise or on demand. The key thing is here that we strive to deliver lean-looking application, really slim-looking application, very focused, lean and simple. However, the world is not that simple. That means that different users and especially different customers have different expectations, different requirements from the same application. So therefore, we need to be able to adjust the application to the specific needs. So that means we have to hide the overall required complexity and the background and only switch on, add to the lean user interface what really is needed. So that gives us a directive hint for the next design principle, that is that we need to design for variability. That means that the design we are doing needs to be able to cooperate with that flexibility, that you're able to add fields, release fields, move them around, add functionality, change tab sequences, and so on. Because if the design does not do it, it might break, so you get some ugly empty spaces and so on. So that needs to be considered in the overall design. And then the last of the big three design principles is what we call coherent user experience. It is not the goal to make everything look like exactly the same. That simply doesn't work, and it doesn't help. However, there are also, again, some key things which need to be similar. For example, the key activities. Where do I save? How do I cancel? How do I move from one screen to another screen, and so on? These are things which should be implemented in a consistent way. Another example is how you do search, how you enter search criteria or select options, things like that. Another example is where are the messages displayed, errors, success messages, and so on. So there are some things which need to be consistent and coherent, and those are covered in our overall guidelines. We'll actually come back later to the guidelines, how we utilize those guidelines to make even our implementation easier and more consistent. So this really the first approach, what you need to understand before we really start with technologies. So what can you do, customer, partner, whoever's dealing with SAP, to improve the way users work? The first thing I mentioned already, think about this user-centered design approach, this design thinking, really iterating with the user. But what can you do with what SAP is delivering, offering as a product? First of all, it's really look at what we are offering. I know it's sometimes not too easy to figure that one out because that offer is really huge, but there are a lot of things, especially coming with the enhancement packages of the business screens, which can drastically improve the user experience. So really, first step, take what's there out of the box, give that to the user. Then the second step would be adapt it to your specific needs, of your user. So really adjust it to that way. And After that, if you then figure out, okay, I'm still not happy, then the option is, okay, you can develop something on your own with SAPUS tools, with other tools, and so on. So those are basically the 3 steps. When we look at the kind of time to value, the level of improvement which we have on the one axis and then the required investment which we have on the other side, it typically turns out to be a curve like that. So take what's there out of the box. Typically is a pretty low barrier. You are very fast in that, and the level of improvement is already pretty high. Extend it in tweaking to your specific user needs, increases it again, but developing on something on your own, typically it drastically improves the required investment on your side, while the benefit might not be that high anymore. However, this is not a scientific curve, so it might also be the case that, especially developing something for your own, I have very good examples from some customers where they've developed 1 or 2 specific applications for 20,000 users, another customer for 40,000 users. That definitely gave another boost in the level of improvement. So it's more a thinking model here than really a scientific curve here. Okay, so for the next part, I want to go into these 3 parts: adopt, adapt, and develop. What options do we have there? And first of all, when we start adopting, what we first of all need to guarantee, need to achieve, is that the user gets access to the system, that he can really take benefit of all what's there. And there's one thing which we just rolled out since September. It's openly available, and we have a high number of downloads and customers going on that already, which is the NetWeaver Business Client. Is a very good example of what we call a client. A client, sometimes you also call it shell, is the access point which can host applications and gives the user one central point of entry where it can access all required functionality within SAP system or multiple SAP systems. The NetWeaver Business Client 4.0 is a new version. It basically has a new visual design. It's very browser-like. It has some what we call tab browsing, which I will show you in a minute. It really is minimized from its footprint on the screen, so there's much more space than in the earlier versions for the real content out there. And for the pure design perspective, we have implemented what we call the so-called Corbo design, which you will also see that it nicely fits together. Another key asset of this NetWeaver Business Client is what we call the quick launch bar. I will also show you that. So there you can enter, if you know the SAP GUI transaction code, but you can also enter applications, names of other things. At the same time, it's also a search bar where we have an open search interface. So you can not only use the SAP search for SAP devices, but you can also further integrate with the open search interface whatever is relevant for you. The last very interesting things for SAP users out there is the so-called side panel there. But this might be probably too much theory, so really let's have a look at the NetWeaver Business Client. So what you see now is the NetWeaver Business Client. It is actually role specific, so it's a NetWeaver Business Client for myself. It knows about me, it knows my role. So I can go in here, have the relevant parts for me. There's a home area where I can have a look at my work center, for example. So calling up this work center. This is something which could be very intranet-like. Behind this, we have this so-called page builder. So you can actually put web pages together, put your own parts in there. You can also create like workload overviews, quick access to specific parts. There are some favorites which you can do, or save searches. So pretty typical from a home screen out of that. Going back to my overall index page, which I have here started, I can also go through the key applications for me. For example, I could launch specific information on my employees. I could go through data, master data management to sales and purchasing there, and so on. I could launch some reports and so on. What also is there? I talked about this tab browsing, so you can open up a new tab, and this is what you probably know from most new browser versions already. So you've got this automation, okay, what is frequently used by me, what did I last open, I can have an index page and so on. And actually, if you think this would be a nicer start page or the home screen, which we saw before, you can actually, with a right-click of the mouse, you can actually pin and unpin these screens, and next time you start the NetWeaver Business Client, it will actually launch with the page you just selected. So this is a very nice and easy way in order to kind of personalize it and really to adjust it to your specific needs. There's also certainly the ability to create favorites, so you also have that in place. We were talking about this search bar or quick launch bar. So I have this one here. I might know a transaction code. I'm not a fan of transaction codes, so I'm still looking like I have to create a sales order. So I type in a sales order. So now the system does a desktop search on sales order. It actually finds applications which do the sales order, or it can find specific sales orders which are there for me. I right now want to start the specific sales order here in this process. So what I get now, and this is what we call the classical SAP GUI. Here you see it in an implementation, the Corbo design. It's running right now inside the NetWeaver Business Client. And I will actually just run this through here and start this application. You see that the icons are a bit adjusted here in order to fit better to the NetWeaver Business Client. And so now I get this typical transaction display order credit management. Now the nice thing about it, this is a transaction which has been there for a while. It's available in older releases and has not been touched and does not need to be touched. However, I can non-disruptively add further information in this so-called side panel, which I just opened up here. So the side panel is something which you can optionally use. It knows and understands the context which you're here and which you know on the left-hand side. So it can show me further information like the customer balance total, like the period drill down. I can have also further information on here. I can also show document flow. I can create collaboration on this topic and other parts. So technically what we do, we actually have a tagging that we know the context here. So if you change the credit order, for example, or display a different customer and so on, the side panel knows about it and can display the specific context on that side. So this is something where we'll also get very good feedback from customers because they don't have to change anything in their existing system, but can just add further information and therefore increase the efficiency of their users and make them more happy. Okay, coming back to the presentation. So we saw the NetWeaver Business Client, and we already saw the SAP GUI. One of the typical questions I get in my presentation is about how do these slides fit together? When should I use what? So the SAP GUI, the SAP logon, well known out there for years, actually over centuries out there, which typically is used in a desktop version, in a Windows version. There's the web GUI or the HTML GUI also available as an option to use this without a local implementation. That is purely using the so-called SAP ABAP Dynpros out of that. So it's a classic transaction launcher. You don't really have a menu-based access, but if you are running like one or two applications, that's all what your user's doing, that is fine. However, right now I see more trend towards more role-based access, and this is why we started to implement the NetWeaver Business Client, which you saw now in the version 4.0, which actually can embed fully the SAP GUI as you saw it right now. It's fully integrated. It's also technically, it's something like this. If you use the local installation, the Windows version, the SAP GUI is there, it's behind, so they have the full functionality of the SAP GUI. Plus you have the things I just showed to you, like the role-based access, all these menus around, and the ability to also launch other applications based on other technologies. So we already saw these kind of web pages. I will show you how to put in Web Pro screens. I will show you how to put in HTML5 screens and so on. So this is all available. So this is really a recommendation right now for somebody which we would probably call right now an expert user who works a lot in the SAP system. But if you want, you could also add other information through the web page access. Then on the right-hand side, we have our portal, which kind of, if you want to, is a high fidelity version. The big difference from the portal compared to the NetWeaver Business Client is that the portal really is optimized also for displaying content like which you require for intranet, but also using it external. So it's really like more a content management system. It has a lot of collaboration capabilities and so on. There's one more thing about the portal. It has also a very mature system landscape management capabilities. So if you're running very complex systems and have users who really need to access across systems, multiple systems, and so on, that is where the portal can deliver very high value because of this capabilities. It's a central hub in the landscape which then connects through the other system. The NetWeaver business client, on the other side, needs to be hooked up to one preferred system, so you need to hook it up with one ABAP backend actually. Out of that, you can also connect to other systems, but it's not that comfortable if you're running really a very complex system landscape. So that hopefully gives you an idea on how to differentiate these three clients and when to use what. Right now, we always give out the recommendation, look at the NetWeaver business client from our typical customer use cases. That seems to really add a high value out of that. So I've shown you a lot of I've shown you one side panel actually. There are a lot of side panels out there, just some examples. Actually, the colleagues within the business suite right now have enabled close to 1,000 transactions with those side panels. And I show these side panels here again because they are one very good example of what I mean when I talk about content. You might remember the curve I showed to you, the first one, take what's there out of the box, look what we have as content. So content can be side panels, content can be really concrete applications which we are delivering there, Webdom Pro ABAP application, Floorplan application, Manager application, other application. Content can be predefined roles. However, you will probably need to adjust them, but it's much easier to adjust something which is there and just tweak it than to create something on your own. Therefore, we're releasing a lot of roles. We're releasing a lot of work lists, and there are other things which we are also releasing as well. Another thing which you might also know or aware of are really like mobile applications. That's certainly not running through a portal or a NetWeaver business client. There will be mobile versions. Also, a mobile portal is also available, but you could also directly launch these applications. And if you want to play with them, you can have a snapshot of this one. The SAP electronic medical record there, it's out in the App Store. You can play with sample data like with all these ones, which gives you a very good impression on how these things are working. So this content is delivered with enhancement packages, and the higher the enhancement package, the higher the content there is. So there probably is already a lot of out there for customers. Well, we typically see that customers apply these enhancement packages but don't use the content. One thing is that they don't use the content. If you're just using the SAP GUI, you won't have access to all of this new content because the SAP GUI only is able to show the classical DynPro transaction, while most of this new content is created with web technologies which are not running in the classical GUI. So therefore, the NetWeaver business client or the portal is the kind of enabler to all this new content. Okay, what do you do once you have this context? Then what you have look, for example, as an application. An application is what you see here also on the screen. This one is built with the so-called Floorplan Manager. The Floorplan Manager is what we actually built because of our user interface guideline. We have what we call floor plan. That is that the layout is always the same, but the content is different. So one very good example for a floor plan is what you see here is the so-called overview page. We're able to put all the context onto one page. You can use tabs, you can use assignment blocks, you can drag and drop them around. I will show you that in a minute in the live system. But this is a page and application where you don't have a specific sequence which you go through, but that is you need to have all the information at hand and all the functionality in hand. Another good example for a floor plan is a so-called guided activity, where you have a kind of a roadmap on top, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on, which really guides you through the steps you need to do. That means that you have a predefined sequence where you can work on. So we did a framework on that. It's based on Webdom Pro ABAP, and our developers go in now and really they get the design from our design and say, okay, this is, for example, a guided activity. I need 3 steps. Put that into the configuration. I need to connect it to the backend, and then I can basically configure what fields I'm there, what functionality do I want to use, and what happens if I drill further down. So the good thing for us, it speeds up development. It drastically increases also the consistency of our application. The key advantage for customers, partners, and users are that a lot of these screens, the most properties of these screens are configured and not coded. That means if you want to adjust those screens, you do not have to go through the coding, so you can do it really modification-free. You can basically change the configuration and adjust it to your specific needs. So let's have a look at how that really looks like. So again, we're here in the NetWeaver business client. We're not talking about the SAPUS anymore, but I want to go, for example, in the sales order purchasing. I have purchasing, and I will start this purchase order right now here. And so we have this search criteria out here, so I can actually fire up the search, which gives me like some search results down here. But actually, the way typically things are, I'm not that easy in my work. So I got this mail from my big boss, please use these suppliers, and an Excel again. Okay, why can he not send it and integrate it directly in the system, which would be very easy possible, but launching the Excel gives me the favorite suppliers I would need to work with and look in. So I go into this Excel, I copy them out of this Excel and say into the supplier field in here. And what you see in here, the system directly recognizes where the properties need and it adds them all. So in order to get space back on the screen, I will collapse it here and initiate the search again and stop the search criteria out of that. So now I have this result list. I can actually tweak this list here. There's some paging and so on. I might not be interested in the gross amount, but I want to look at the overall sum. So I will calculate the overall sum. The overall sum is not good enough, so I will group it by supplier name. And now I'm able to really drill down in a nice and easy way through all my suppliers. So basically things you know from table behavior like Excel and so on, which are all available through this application there, and actually part of that blueprint, the so-called Floorplan Manager. You also get some further information. For example, if you drill down here or in the supplier ID, looking at the supplier, you get this quick information, or you can go directly into the system here, directly really find more information on the supplier, where you find the detailed data and so on. So things like that. You have here again the quick view, or if you want to really now drill down into the purchase order, I see right now the purchase order, which is opening in a new tab here. So this is, again, Floorplan Manager application. I was talking about personalization. So what can I do? I can actually drag and drop on a personal level this around here. I can make it stackable, which basically means that if I don't like to have the details under each other, I can create tabs out of that. So I have the purchase order details, I have these items out here, and so on. So this is what I can all do in a personalizable level. And these are the things here. Next thing, which might go beyond personalization, is if you have some kind of power user in your line of business who would be very interested in adjusting some fields, tweaking it to your unit-specific needs. You can actually go in further. Say, this time you see, okay, these are the areas I can configure. So I can figure this overall general data block. I simply click on it, which opens now the kind of what we call the design time for this part. And here we'll be able now to configure the user interface to my very specific needs out of here. So this is something which you need to enable per role. So this won't be open for all users, but it should be open to a specific group of users, so it's a property which you can add to the role. Same thing with personalization. There are a lot of people who love personalization. So that is something which I really like. On the other hand, I know a lot of companies and IT departments who do not want to allow their users to personalize it because they have the fear that they might screw up the screen there. So therefore, it's also for sure also customizable there. So here I have now this kind of preview of my layout there in a schematic way, and I have some kind of bad system connectivity right now here. So what I can actually do, I don't like the zip code behind the house number, so I drag it up here. So I have the zip code now. I need this here as well, and I don't like this empty row here, so I will delete it. And now I can actually save this. And as you know from SAP, probably it can create transport records or not. I want to do it just locally, so just save it locally. And basically, data has been saved. I can close this tab. I will also close this one. And the next time I'm opening up this screen again, get my click. Next time I open up the screen, I will see actually a change in the sequence as I just did it. Okay, so that was the floor plan manager. As I said, the benefit of that really is that you can use it as a customer to adapt existing screens. On the other hand, this is also a tool we recommend if you want to build your own tools. So if you're up right now at the decision, okay, I have to build something on your own, the floor plan manager is definitely something very easy, fast to use, easy to build. So that is the first thing you should do. The floor plan manager targets what we call more the traditional user interfaces. It's based on the floor plans. It's more form-based. It's good for table handling. You can create all these assignment blocks. If you want to go a bit further, create something more from a casual user experience, then we're probably talking about using something like HTML5, because that can create really a new user experience, because compared to the floor plan manager where we're very sticking to user interface guidelines, this is something where we're really able to build something freestyle, fancy, something very specific, also pixel perfect there. The key difference of that one is using HTML5, which is a client-side rendering, meaning it takes good property of the strong JavaScript engine of the new browsers, while with the WebDimpro and other parts, we're talking about server-side rendering, that meaning that the user interface is generated on the server and then sent up to the front, which can also have impacts depending on the bandwidth which is available to you. So you see here some examples of HTML5 screens. Out of that, we actually have built our own implementation on top of jQuery, which we call SAP UI5. Out of that, the key reason is that we need as SAP to offer what we call enterprise qualities. We need to be able to fulfill a lot of our product standards, making sure that we're able to translate the screen, making sure that the security is fully sufficient out of that, making sure that it's accessible for people who have handicaps and so on. So this is all parts which was not there in the standard community. So this is an open framework that can be easily extended and adjusted with other libraries, but which can do our basic part. It's building applications for a desktop, but you can also use it for mobile usage. And that is a key advantage. That means a developer has only to apply and learn the skills one, and he can really work with that the whole world and really bringing desktop and mobile together. So this is a key advantage of this part. Okay, again, I want to show you an example out of that. So let's launch something out of that. Again, the NetWeaver Business Client. Going back to HR, you know my HR background. So I will launch an overview page in the HR area. And this is something built with HTML5, and it's targeted for the so-called personal administrator. So the personal administrator gets here a start page where he can start his work in the morning, wherever he wants to start. So he gets this difference. We call it actually lanes. He can have tasks, he can have actions. If he does not like the sequence or the order, he can actually shuffle them around, as you can see here. He can change the order in here, and so on, and other things around. If you have more parts to look at here, this can be swapped around. Not really sure if you're able to see the animation through the streaming in here. It has some nice animation. And you can also change the content. For example, edit the lanes there, adding some further content. So I don't want the task by time. I want to get rid of that. You can actually get rid of that. Or if you say the background picture, I don't really like these flowers out here. I would like to have it a bit warmer today, so put it a background image out of that. So things you can very easily tweak out of that. Out of that, you can then again launch application, which can be application in the classical GUI, which can be WebImpro application, which can be further HTML5, whatever application. It really serves as a start and integration service here. These lanes are running independent of each other, so you can also pull in content from various sources. The sources could be also on demand. What you see here, this is more an Outlook. It's more a technical option. So here you could also combine on demand or on-premise, but it can be also from various systems and various applications out of that. Okay, so what I've shown to you is an application which was built with the long word is SAP UI Development Toolkit for HTML5. It's even too long for us, so therefore we always talk about SAP UI5, SAP UI5. It offers you a native look and feel on any device. So if you program something like on an iPhone, on an Android, we have taken care of that. It's also there. We have a mobile library there available, so it can handle mobile and desktop out of that. There's a huge amount of predefined controls. We also have graphics and charts available, and we're continuing on to work on that. You can build pixel-perfect design with that, and the typical way on using that is using it on top of our so-called gateway, which is pulling out the data in the so-called OData format, and therefore on top of that you can use this framework to build applications like that. That is the recommended approach of how to build application on that one. But if you have further questions on that one, I will put it either to the questions or you can contact me later if you want and to go into detail on this one. So here are some milestones out there. Actually, in February, we kicked off the beta program in our SDN network, software development network out there. Tons of downloads out there, very positive feedback from externals who were using out of that. So internally, we're right now in a version 1.8. 1.6 is released to the market. 1.8, which also includes mobile controls, will be available end of this year, early next year, also to the open market. It's an open framework. You can use, you can download it, you can use it as you like. So we also try to continue the open source idea. So building on top of open source libraries like jQuery, you can combine it with other charts libraries and so on. So it's something very open. Okay, coming to the nearly last bit, this is what you've seen before, is talking about integration. I showed you all these demos in one client. It was one access for all of that. So we've seen SAP GUI transaction, we've seen WebImpro application, we've seen pure web pages in where we've seen HTML5, SAP UI5 applications all together. Hopefully you agree that that was a pretty seamless user experience for one user. As a user, I did not have to care of where they're coming from, what the technology is behind it, how do I use it. It was all pretty intuitive. Even the personalization was working across on that part out of that. So in order to achieve that, we need really this kind of integration capabilities. There are a lot of services running in the back, not only launching the application, not only transferring the data and metadata, but also transferring information like what is the current user, what are the user preferences, what is the role of the users, and what would be the preferred navigation target once a user navigates to something, and what is the context the user is working in. So these are all services which we call integration services, which are there, which need to be there in the background, which can be deployed through a NetWeaver business client, but we are also deploying them as services only through what we call a UI extension on, where I come to in a minute. So that will also enable us to work across multiple systems. It will in the future also enable us to go mix on-premise, on-demand, but also to go cross-device. So this is also something, if you think of transferring all of this to a mobile world, that is where you also need this integration capabilities. So that is somehow the very interesting, on the other hand, somehow the tricky part, because these parts are so important, but they're not visible at all. So therefore, it's important to know that they are there, to look for them, and to really use them in the right way. I mentioned the so-called UI extensions add-on. So in order to release parts of our software or user interfaces faster and enabling our customers in a non-disruptive way to better improve the way users work, we are starting to pull out more and more parts of user interface frameworks out of the classical basis application system and put them in an add-on which can be deployed independent of the traditional releases, enhancement package, and so on, which can then give you additional benefit. One example is for the NetWeaver Business Client. That is available in our add-on, the NetWeaver Business Client with the side panel, so you can deploy it also against older releases and have a benefit out of that. It's also about the services, and one thing which will also come out there, which is a look for the future, it's this kind of cross-theming there. So these are things where we are targeting to build out things in a non-release dependent way. Okay. So and that's an overview of the releases. I won't go into details on that one. If you have questions, send them to me. I will give you this overview at that stage. We will also publish this. The last bit, as I promised you, is an outlook. I'm not saying there's one more thing. We are not that company, because there's not just one more thing. There's more to come. I already talked about a theme designer. So we want to enable cross-theming, cross-styling above SAP UI5, above WebDerm Pro, above the Floorplan Manager, and probably more in the future. So probably in the first half of next year, we will release the NetWeaver Business Client. We're also working on, for SAP UI5, an app designer. So some of you might have been present in the TechEd, which was a couple of weeks ago in Las Vegas, and the next one is next week in Madrid. So in the keynote, we showed the SAP UI5 app designer, which is using HTML5, our UI5 implementation, but offers you a very nice drag and drop capabilities to put your screens together out of template, adjust it to your needs, and publish it through mobile devices. Another piece which we will also publish initially through our custom development, the so-called SAP Personas, is a tool which will allow you to tweak SAP GUI screens in a non-disruptive way. So therefore, these SAP GUI screens can be adjusted. You see here this kind of tiger or leopard leopard in the background there. So you can put background pictures around, you can drag and drop fields around, you can hide fields and so on while running the transaction in the background. So you can give your users a very specific user experience based on existing GUI transactions. So this just as an outlook. So with this, I'm nearly at the end of my presentation, so we'll open up for questions in a second. I've talked a lot about Sapphire Now and TechEd Madrid. I will be there as well as Madrid, so if some of you listening right now will be there, we have this big pot about user experience, which will hopefully look like this. I will be there most of the time standing in the You Do It area talking about similar things. If you have questions or just want to meet and network and make sure there's a connection, please come there and meet with me. I will be happy to meet anyone who is interested to further go deeper into this topic. With that said, I'm basically at the end of my presentation. I see right now in the chat there's one question which I'm reading now, and then we can open up for further questions.
Hey Nis, it's Andy and John from Advanced Tech. Many thanks for that, Nis. That was absolutely outstanding. We've got well, a lot of people online. I think what would be useful now, because due to the number of people online, for those who are listening, could you type in the chat box, what is your role? How do you actually use SAP? So are you a project manager? Are you an implementation manager? Then we can perhaps level the questions at the audience. So if you quickly type in the chat box, what is your role? And we'll take a view on what questions to post.
Okay, so I'm basically the chief product owner of SAP user interfaces or technologies and frameworks, which is probably easier to understand. That is why I'm typing this one here. So, and for sure, I'm also an SAP user. As a role, I'm also a manager and an employee. So this is also the things where even in SAP, we're using SAP on our own. So as a manager, I have to go through performance management cycles. I have to do sales increase. I have to do all the things with my employees. I have to do budget. I have to do budget forecasts and so on. I have to hand in as an employee travel expenses. I have to do my time recording. I'm handing in certainly my vacation requests, but I'm also looking at the vacation requests of my people and so on. So that is my role in that one. One quick question. One question on the chat. That is answered quickly. There was a question in the NetWeaver Business Client and the SAP Logon/SAP GUI. If you install the NetWeaver Business Client for all right now, you can bundle the implementation with the SAP GUI implementation or SAP Logon implementation. So therefore, it's fully included, and the NetWeaver Business Client right now is adding something like 20 or 30 megabyte to the overall implementation. So it's not much. Therefore, my recommendation to customers if you're thinking about like doing a new GUI rollout round there, combine it directly with the NetWeaver Business Client and do it in one round. So hopefully that question answers there. I think you wanted to have some more questions, John?
Yeah, we were just looking in terms of the audience, for those who are listening, so the attendees, could you quickly type in the chat box? A few of you have already. What is your role in SAP? How do you use SAP? So are you an implementation manager? Are you on the business side of things? So for the final question, we'll know where to pitch the question. So if we could just take 10 seconds out, and if you could post your question in the chat box, post your position in the chat box, we'll then focus the last question around the audience. Fabulous. Well, we've got implementation managers online, we've got program managers, we've got consultants. I think a good question will be then, from what we've seen so far, in the next, let's say, the next 12 months, what do you see as the biggest challenges in implementing SAP in your sector, Nisboy, in terms of user interface? And what can we do to overcome it? And we've got about 4 or 5 minutes to answer that question.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting question. And, well, I would say, initially, the biggest challenge is probably that a lot of people are aware of user interfaces, talk about it, have a feeling, have an opinion that user interface is good or not good, and sometimes, too often, our SAP user interfaces are not as good as they can be. And out of that, really figuring out what really is the reason behind it and what should be really done out of that. I think that is really the key question, which probably goes back a bit to this kind of design thinking and user-centered design process, really understanding what is the complaint, what is the really need behind it, what do users really need, and how can I do that? So first of all, really, okay, take that feedback, first of all, definitely serious, but also look at what the people are doing and what they are supposed to be doing. Actually, giving you one example, when you're asking users, it's not always the right thing what they want. So if users complain about something, they will probably come up on that screen, there's this button in the wrong place, or I need this additional functionality. Think about it in a different approach. Is it overall the right approach? A very good examples were petrol stations something like 40 years ago, where there was no self-service at all. So people were going there. So the owner of the petrol station, the service people were filling up the car, and the people were paying just driving off, and they're not putting it into the hand. The big revolution was a self-service, drastically overall increasing the process flows. However, if you would have done a survey on the petrol station's owner, they would have never come up to that idea. They would have certainly been of the opinion, no, it's too difficult, it's too complex for a car driver, for a simple driver to fill up a car out of that. So that just to give you an idea of what people might complain and what's behind it. So you need to think out of the box on that. Then, once you understood that, I think then it would be probably going along the three options as I laid them out. So what can you do? What is SAP offering? Is there something which I can directly use? Is it something which I can nearly use, meaning that to tweak it with the examples I've given to you? Or is it something where I really need to build something specific on top on my own? And there I probably should also think about, is it something which might be worth doing it mobile? Is it something which is desktop? Is it both worth? And that is again something which then would be considered there. At SAP, we start following what we call a mobile-first approach. That means when we build new applications, we design them first for the mobile case. That way, really forcing people to make it as simple as possible. And then through configurations, through other parts, scaling it up for desktop is needed, or having it just as a mobile version out there.
That was fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm sure you need a glass of water after that. That was outstanding.
Thank you very much.
I was just going to finish on, you've got your contact details on the screen.
Yes.
So listeners, please do contact Nisboy direct with any questions. Alternatively, contact us. We'll be sending out our contact details after the event. And again, Nisboy, thank you so much for your time. I know how much effort you've put into creating this presentation. And I'm sure we've had over 1,000 registrants for this webinar. And once again, thank you so much for the outstanding content. Thank you, Nisboy.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for hosting this and making this event possible. And thank you for everyone listening. And as John said, get in contact with me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you out.